Scary telling.
The dimly lit scan room enveloped me in an eerie atmosphere, the sterile white walls seeming to close in on me. I sat in front of the monitor, my gaze fixed on the lifeless body lying on the scanning table. The scan results had been devastating, metastases scattered throughout the liver, lungs, and bones. It looked like another failed attempt at a cancer treatment. Lost in my thoughts, I didn't notice Terry, my colleague, approaching from behind. He leaned over my chair, peering at the scan. "Whoa, lit up like a Christmas tree again," he remarked, his voice filled with a mix of amusement and disbelief. "Hell, there's even a hot spot in the skull." He let out a low whistle. "Don't think insurance will pay for another one." I sighed, my heart sinking further. "Nope," I replied, my voice laden with resignation. "This is the third scan we've done for Mr. Robinson. He's running out of options unless he's willing to volunteer for the next trial himself." Terry chuckled, dropping back into his computer chair. "Yeah, then he'll be Daisha's problem," he remarked with a smirk. "Don't know how they handle the real deal. At least these clones are quiet. Well, most of the time." I glanced at the body lying motionless on the scanning table, contemplating Terry's words. "I suppose it can be nice to interact with a real person from time to time," I mused, my voice tinged with a hint of longing for genuine human connection. "Ah, if you say so," Terry replied dismissively. "Personally, I prefer these clones. Silent as long as transport doesn't rip out the damn IVs." A grimace creased my face as I vividly recalled the last time transport mishandled one of these experimental subjects. The clone had thrashed and screamed, an agonizing display of suffering that felt never-ending. "Remind me to tape the line up the arm," I said, my voice laced with determination. "That way, it'll stay in place even if it does get snagged." "Aye, Captain," Terry responded, mimicking a salute and letting out a light chuckle. The scanning table shifted into its final bed position, and my gaze instinctively locked onto the still body. The mere thought of that thing waking up now sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I glanced through the small hole in the gantry, my focus drawn to the infusion pump resting on the far end of the table, just above the clone's head. It beeped softly, seemingly mocking the silence that pervaded the room. "You think it'll hurt to increase the flow a little?" I asked Terry, my voice hesitant. "I don't want to call the sleep team again. You know how long they take to find us." Terry gestured towards the scan results on the monitor. "Based on that, the fucker's dying anyway," he remarked callously. "We'd be doing it a favor." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I knew what had to be done. Standing up, I made my way towards the scan room, the hallway engulfed in darkness. We like to keep it that way, low stimulation, no incident was a good incident. I walked into the scan room, the faint glow of the gantry's timer catching my eye. 2 minutes left. Transport had better be on their way. The last thing I wanted was to have this thing sitting out in the hall, a macabre display for unsuspecting passers-by. My footsteps echoed softly as I made my way around to the back of the scanner. I reached out and grabbed the infusion pump, the cold plastic sending a chill up my arm. I pushed the buttons, each beep punctuating the tense silence. And then, it happened. The clone's head twitched, and I jumped back, my heart racing. I stood frozen in place, waiting for the anticipated screams, the thrashing. But to my surprise, it was still. I cautiously approached, my eyes locked on the clone's face. Its features were gaunt, the skin sallow and tinged with yellow, evidence of liver failure. I couldn't help but wonder if Mr. Robinson looked the same now. If he didn't find a working treatment soon, hospice would become the only option, a bleak and heartbreaking reality. This clone clearly wasn't benefiting from the treatment either. As I stood there, a mix of compassion and guilt washed over me, knowing that our efforts had fallen short once again. The weight of the suffering we inflicted and the desperation of those we couldn't help bore heavily on my conscience. With a heavy sigh, I stepped back, leaving the infusion pump in place. The flow rate adjusted, a small attempt to ease the clone's pain. But deep down, I knew it was a futile gesture. The seconds ticked away, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was a better way, a way to end the suffering and break free from this cycle of failed experiments. Leaving the scan room, I felt a lingering sense of unease. The darkness of the hallway seemed to mirror the shadows that had consumed my conscience. The weight of responsibility pressed down upon me, questioning the morality of our actions and the limits to which we were willing to go in the pursuit of a cure. As I closed the door behind me, I couldn't shake off the haunting realization that this wasn't just about one failed experiment. It was about the countless others trapped in this cycle, the countless lives left hanging in the balance. And I wondered, as I walked away, if there was still a chance for redemption, for change. The weight of guilt settled heavily upon my shoulders as I returned to my workstation. The Scanlim's sterile environment felt suffocating, as if the very air held a malevolent energy that resonated with my inner turmoil. I couldn't shake the haunting realization that we were complicit in the suffering of these clones, trapped in a cycle of failed experiments. My mind swirled with questions, doubts, and an overwhelming sense of impending doom. How had we reached this point? When had the pursuit of a cure become so detached from compassion and ethical considerations? I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that we were treading upon dangerous ground, venturing into the realm of the unknown without fully comprehending the consequences. As I stared at the computer screen, my gaze fixed on the endless rows of data and research papers, I wondered if there was a different path we could have taken. Could we have chosen empathy over experimentation? Could we have prioritized the well-being of these suffering souls over the pursuit of scientific advancement? The weight of despair settled deeper within me as I recalled the faces of the clones, their silent agony, their desperate hope for a cure that continuously eluded them. It wasn't just about Mr. Robinson or the individual subjects we worked with, it was about the countless others who had suffered, and those who would continue to suffer in the name of progress. A heavy sigh escaped my lips, mingling with the sterile air of the room. How had we become desensitized to their pain? How had we allowed ourselves to rationalize their suffering as a means to an end? I realized that we had lost touch with our humanity, numbed by the clinical environment and the constant pursuit of scientific breakthroughs. The sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway interrupted my thoughts, and a sense of trepidation washed over me. It was the transport team, the heralds of a temporary respite from the burden we bore. Relief mingled with guilt as I welcomed their arrival, knowing that they would bear witness to the torment we had become complacent in perpetuating. As the transport team entered the scan room, their presence injected a new energy into the stagnant air. They wore their masks of professionalism, their eyes guarded and distant. I couldn't help but wonder if they, too, carried the weight of moral ambiguity upon their shoulders, if they, too, questioned the limits to which we were pushing the boundaries of science. Their efficiency in preparing the clone for transport was a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within me. The silent, motionless figure on the scanning table was handled with clinical detachment, devoid of any recognition of the pain it had endured. It was just another subject, a mere vessel for experimentation. I watched as they wheeled the clone away, disappearing down the dimly lit hallway. Their footsteps faded into the distance, leaving me alone with the ghosts of my choices. The room seemed emptier now, devoid of life, both literal and metaphorical. Leaning back in my chair, I closed my eyes, attempting to silence the cacophony of doubts and regrets that plagued my mind. It was in this darkness, both external and internal, that I began to question the boundaries we had crossed. How far were we willing to go in the pursuit of a cure? And more importantly, what have we sacrificed along the way? As the scan room swallowed me whole, I knew that there was no turning back. The descent into darkness had begun, and I could only hope that within the shadows, a flicker of light would guide us towards redemption, towards a path where empathy and ethics would once again intertwine. The heavy burden of guilt and moral ambiguity weighed me down as I entered the scan room once again. The sterile environment felt colder, more oppressive than ever before, and the hum of the machines seemed to mock me, a constant reminder of the suffering we had perpetuated. This time, however, there was something different in the air. An undercurrent of tension and unease crackled, signaling that we had reached a breaking point, a moment where the facade of scientific progress could no longer shield us from the darkness we had created. I glanced at the monitor, the scan results revealing yet another failure, a damning reflection of our futile efforts. Mr. Robinson's clone lay lifeless on the scanning table, a silent witness to our shortcomings. It was as if his stillness mirrored the stagnant state of our research, a reminder that time was running out for those desperate for a cure. Terry, too, seemed unsettled as he joined me in the scan room. His usual nonchalant demeanor was replaced by a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a glimpse of remorse that mirrored my own. We stood side by side, facing the consequences of our actions, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily upon us. "This can't go on," Terry said, his voice barely above a whisper, but his words reverberated through the silence. "We can't keep sacrificing these clones for the sake of our experiments. There has to be another way." His words struck a chord deep within me, resonating with the doubts that had been festering. The realization that we were complicit in this cycle of suffering had become too heavy to bear. I nodded in agreement, a surge of determination coursing through my veins. "We need to take a stand," I replied, my voice filled with a newfound conviction. "We have to confront the ethical implications of our work and demand change. These clones deserve better than to be treated as disposable test subjects." Terry's gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. We shared a silent understanding, a pact to challenge the system we had become a part of. It was time to face the consequences, to embrace the uncertainty of what lay beyond the walls of this sterile facility. With resolute determination, we began to devise a plan to expose the truth, to shed light on the atrocities hidden within these walls. We knew it wouldn't be easy. The path we were embarking on was fraught with risks, but the moral imperative demanded action. Days turned into nights as we meticulously gathered evidence, documenting the failures and injustices that had become commonplace. We reached out to allies, to those who shared our concerns and who believed in the power of compassion and ethical boundaries. And then, the day of reckoning arrived. With hearts pounding, we stood before a panel of higher-ups, individuals who held the power to enact change. We presented our evidence, our voices filled with a mix of passion and urgency. We implored them to reevaluate the ethics of our research, to prioritize the well-being of these clones over the relentless pursuit of progress. There was resistance, skepticism, and a veil of denial that hung heavily in the room. But we refused to back down. We stood firm in our convictions, knowing that the truth could no longer be silenced. Days turned into weeks, and as the momentum of our movement grew, cracks began to appear in the facade. Whispers of discontent spread like wildfire within the facility. Colleagues who had once turned a blind eye to the suffering began to question their own complicity. The dark secrets of our research could no longer be contained. And finally, the breakthrough we had fought so hard for arrived. Policies were revised, safeguards were implemented, and a renewed commitment to ethical research took hold. The clones were no longer mere subjects, they were recognized as individuals deserving of compassion and dignity. As I walked through the now bright hallways, the ghosts of our past slowly fading away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. We had confronted our demons, challenged the status quo, and emerged on the other side. The journey had been harrowing, the path fraught with darkness and uncertainty. But we had managed to break free from the cycle, to redefine the boundaries of our work, and to reclaim our humanity. And as I looked at the clones, no longer silent figures of suffering but individuals with stories yet to be written, I knew that our fight had been worth it. We had ushered in a new era, one where compassion and ethics guided our pursuit of a cure, ensuring that no more lives would be sacrificed in the name of progress.